everyone. Vincent is back, and I'm here to share my story about my journey out of the Watchtower Society and how I became a follower of Christ. And I am so excited to continue on in my testimony about how Christ came to me. Now, in my last couple of videos, we talked about the New World Order and how thinking about these really had an effect on me. And I continued digging down this rabbit hole, and as I had already mentioned, I began to see that whatever is going on here is far bigger than anyone knows. This is huge. This is a spiritual war, because why do they hate Jesus so much? Why do they hate Christians? Why do they want to take over the world? Why is the occult woven all through this process of taking over the world? These things really began to affect me. So I continued on studying these things. But now, I think I've already mentioned this in the past. My son, at some point, he went back to the Watchtower Society. He stayed there probably 3 months, and then he realized, no, these people don't care about spiritual things, and no, they do not have the truth. So he left again the Watchtower Society. However, he was sort of ahead of me, because at this point he knew that he wanted to get back to God. He knew that something bigger was going on here. So one day, as I was continuing down my own rabbit hole here, my son gives me a call. And what he wanted to talk about is God and how God revealed himself in the book of Exodus to Moses. How he gave himself that title, the I Am. And he even told Moses, go to Pharaoh and tell him the I Am has sent you. And what happened there is my son began to talk about how grand God is, how the I Am is the only one that truly exists. He exists independently. He is everything. In fact, he's more real than we are, because we come from him. And again, he is independent of anything. The entire universe came into existence because of him. And he began to talk about how all through history, all these different religions that have different gods, in the end, all of them believed in a supreme God of some sort. They just didn't give a name to it. For example, the Native Americans believed in the Great Spirit. Well, who is the Great Spirit? You know, other cultures, they did the same thing. They spoke of their divine God, but never really gave him a name. But that's what the Apostle Paul was trying to express in the book of Acts, how, you know, he mentioned an altar that was dedicated to an unknown God. And Paul wanted to reveal to them who that unknown God is. And that's pretty much sums up all through history how these people did not know the name of the true God. Who is the Great Spirit? Who is the divine author? So my son began to just talk about in general how grand God is and how normal, you could say, God has been in the lives of people all through history. You know, in school, now that I know how this rabbit hole works, in school we are taught that we are so smart, we're in the scientific age, and, you know, we've only been in the scientific age, say, about 100 years or a little bit more. But in ancient times, people believed in gods. They believed in, you know, many things, and all of this was false, because man has always been stupid since the beginning, but now we are so smart. Well, I began to see that that is a lie completely. Man is a spiritual creature. Man has always been a spiritual creature. Man has always believed in gods and God. So everything we've been taught in school is a lie. And I won't go into it now, but you can study this for yourselves and see how basically what we're being taught in school is truly brainwashing, and they are trying to get us away from God. That's what it's really all about. But I'm not going to go there right now, but this is what I learned, and now I'm having this conversation with my son, and I don't know what was happening within me, but I began to feel that, yes, God is far grander than what I had ever thought. He is interwoven through everything. Everything came from him. Now, I already knew these things prior, but there was something about our conversation that changed something in me. In fact, I began to think about the I am and how, when, remember in the Watchtower Society, they would always quote Ezekiel where it says, I am Jehovah. Well, I began to think about that, how it would sound if he said, I am, because that is who God is. He's the I am. And I know the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, they like to translate it, he causes to become. That's what they say God's name means. That is so weak. Oh, when he wants to be an executioner, he becomes an executioner. When he wants to be a shepherd, he's a shepherd. No, God's name is, it sounds like a breath. He is the I am. He's the only one that gives life. He is the only one that truly exists. This is huge. And for the first time, it really dawned on me that we weren't really taught the grandness of God, just how big he actually is, so to speak. Now, some Jehovah's Witnesses may object to that, but I remember being a Jehovah's Witness. I often thought about God as, on the so-called chariot in Ezekiel. That's the way I pictured God. And yes, God did give, Isaiah and Ezekiel those visions, but it doesn't end there. God was depicting himself as a man on a throne so that they could understand who they were dealing with. But God is far grander than even those visions. So anyway, we had our conversation, and like I said, I can't remember all of the details, but I just remember something was changing within myself. And so our phone call came to an end, and then some time passed by, and one day I got another phone call from him. And remember, the controllers of the New World Order who believe in Luciferianism, who believe in Freemasonry, all of these things, they do believe in the Bible, but they view it differently. And I believe I've already mentioned that. Everything's allegorical. Basically, it's Gnosticism. So that's how they view the Bible. They don't take it literal. So Jesus Christ to them is not a literal historical person. They deny that. Well, what my son was highlighting, and this, of course, has been already shown by many scholars, and that is in 1 John, when John is talking about the Antichrist, there were people at this time, Gnosticism was coming into the congregation, and that is where John said, if you don't believe that the Christ came in the flesh, this is the Antichrist. That is what my son was trying to share with me one day on the phone. And then it really hit me what was happening here. Yes, Christ is a historical person, and they are trying to move us away from the true Christ that died for our sins. That really hit me. And at that point, I don't know what it was, but that is when my true search for God began. Because I don't know what happened to me. Now, this was huge. I turned into an android or a robot. I didn't get emotional about this. All I did, and it really did happen this way, I just went into my kitchen. I grabbed some huge garbage bags, and I went into my occultic museum in one of my bedrooms there, and I took all of my occultic things. I had these models I told you, these various haunted places of the world, and they were intricately made, and they were expensive. I probably spent about $1,400 on these things, just for the houses alone and the buildings. So, but I took all of that and threw it into a garbage bag, all of that, and I took all of my pictures down. I took all of my pictures that I bought. They were expensive, like artistic renderings from horror films, many things. I took everything, my tarot cards, and put everything in garbage bags. And I took it out and I put it in a garbage bin, and I never looked back again. I came back into my house and I didn't regret what I did. I did not wonder why did I do that. I didn't think, well, maybe I should go get it out. I need to bring it back. I didn't feel bad about it. I just didn't even think about it. I was non-emotional about this. I just threw everything away. Well, what happened next after I threw everything away? Well, nothing really changed at this point. If you think about it, what changed between that day and my days years ago when I was searching for God online? Nothing changed. I still didn't know where the truth was. I understood that Jesus was a true historical person at this point. That is what I came to accept. But other than that, nothing really changed. However, things were happening, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was going on inside, why I was behaving the way I was. But after that, in the days that followed, my son called and we began to talk about many, many things. We were talking about faith and salvation and what the Bible's really about. We talked a lot about the Watchtower, of course, but we just had these long conversations about spiritual things. But again, what was so different? I still hadn't found the truth. However, later on, I did find out. I did find the truth. And that is the scripture where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. As a Jehovah's Witness, I never understood those words. No Jehovah's Witness does. I would go to the door. It's so embarrassing. I would go to a door and people would tell me that Jesus Christ is the truth. What do you think my response was? Well, Jesus Christ is the truth, but how does he teach truth? How do we learn the truth? Well, there has to be a true religion. God has to direct his people so that we can learn about this truth. In the Watchtower Society, I could not see it any differently. And if God doesn't reveal these things to you, it's not possible to understand Christ's words. All Christ's words mean is that he is the truth. Being saved has nothing to do with doctrines, has nothing to do with religion. And there's many churches, they believe in Jesus Christ. They believe that they've been saved by Jesus. Why? Because he is the truth. He is the truth. There is no true religion. We live in a time where the wheat and the weeds, the wheat and the tares are all mixed in. And Jesus Christ said in Matthew that at the end of the age, then everything is separated. And then it'll be obvious who the true Christians are. But right now, Christians are scattered everywhere. They're scattered in the churches. They're scattered in their homes. They believe that Christ is the truth, period. And that is what I and all Christians have in common. It doesn't, I used to think that all these different belief systems, religions fought with each other. That's not necessarily true. If you believe in Jesus Christ and you believe in grace and you believe Christ saved you, that's all you need. That's all you need. I never hear of these religions wanting you to join them because they have the truth. Now, there are some religions that are like that, that really want you to go to their church and all that. But most of the time, that is not what I found. No, we are bound together in Jesus Christ because he is the truth. Well, this finally began to make sense to me. And so, through these conversations and all of this, I was also beginning to read the Bible. I wasn't just beginning to read the Bible. I was beginning to really focus on the gospel accounts because the gospel accounts have been hidden from Jehovah's Witnesses. None of it applies to you. I've had videos on that. You really didn't even know what the Apostle Paul or any of them were talking about. You had no clue of the context of these letters, what was going on, because the Watchtower Society didn't want us to know. And later on, I'm going to have a video about a lot of scriptures that we used on that platform in the Kingdom Hall, and the way we used them and how it had nothing to do with what Paul was saying or Christ was saying. And I'm going to have a video just on that alone. But for now, though, at this point, now I'm beginning to learn quite a bit about God and how Jesus is the truth. And I also was seeing how grand Jesus is. Jesus is so important. He is everything. And now we know Jehovah's Witnesses don't feel that way. Now, some Jehovah's Witnesses are going to argue. They're going to say, oh, that's not true. We love Jesus. Oh, look at this book, The Greatest Man That Ever Lived. I talked about that book before, too. It's just a cover-up to make people think that they really do care a lot about Jesus, but they really don't. They reject his the memorial emblems. They do not want to partake of the wine. They don't want to partake of the bread. They reject that. And here actually is a huge clue or proof that Jehovah's Witnesses do not view Christ in a very good light, you could say. Have you ever been on like Temu or Amazon? You know, Jehovah's Witnesses have all of this paraphernalia, you know, jw.org. It could be on a keychain. It could be dangling from the rearview mirror. They got bracelets. They got t-shirts. They got everything about Jehovah's Witnesses, especially jw.org. But you also find a lot of their paraphernalia will have scriptures. It'll have God's name on it. It'll say Jehovah this, Jehovah that. How many times do you find paraphernalia of Jehovah's Witnesses that actually mention Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life? You never do. It's all Jehovah, 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 Jehovah. And I know that that is true because even when I prayed to God, yes, I knew we prayed through Jesus, but I didn't really think about Jesus. You know, it seemed like I was going directly to God and just bypassing Jesus altogether because we were not taught just how important Christ is. He is the way to God. He is the mediator. He is everything. When we see Christ, we're looking at a photograph of God. I've mentioned that expression before. It's in one of my, I think it's the William Tyndale translation of the New Testament. In the introduction, he says, Jesus is the photograph of God. And that is true. Christ is the only one we can truly understand. So Christ is huge. He is the truth. That is something I cannot overemphasize. That Jehovah's Witnesses did not emphasize that point to its people. But here we are now. I am beginning to learn all of these things. Well, what happens next? Well, you have to remember, as I was having these conversations, reading the Bible with, along with all these phone calls that my son and we were having, months went by, and I continued on learning, but I didn't have any true indication of what to do next. You know, I was just reading the Bible, listening to our conversations, but I didn't really have any other answers. I didn't know, again, if my experience was just something I was creating, or is God giving me these things? Those were questions I had. Well, what happens next? And again, I didn't make these things happen. This isn't something I created. I just was searching for God. That's it. But the next thing that happens was something I never thought would happen. As a Jehovah's Witness, we were taught that being born again, all of these experiences that people have, are just a bunch of garbage. We were taught that these things are just made up. People are exaggerating. People are just emotionally, unbalanced when they have these types of experiences that I'm going to talk about in my next video. So in my next video, we're going to get to the point where Christ actually finds me. It is the climax of my testimony. But as I mentioned already, your testimony does not end there. I will continue to talk about the things I've experienced. I want to talk about my experience even in the Watchtower Society, because I've had time to reflect on these things and really see what God was doing for me. So I'm going to have a lot of other things to share, and I'm also going to talk about how my view of the Bible and everything has changed. My mind has just been wide open, because once you leave the Watchtower Society, you can learn so much about God. Whereas in the Watchtower, you can only learn what is in a Watchtower volume. And we know there is not much information in those things at all. So anyway, we're going to conclude the video here, but in my next video, and I want to make this real soon, and that is what happened to me after these events of throwing away my occultic things and these phone conversations and learning that Christ is the truth. What happened after months of doing these things? Well, that's what's going to be in my next video. So until my next video, like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you next time.